Welcome everyone to our study of Journey Without Goal, the Tantric Wisdom of the Buddha, which is a phenomenal introduction to the Vajrayana by Chögyam Rinpoche, the Vijayadhara Chögyam Rinpoche. And as always, we bring to this kind of study the recognition of its value. We can say there's a lot of things that we can learn in this world, but a lot of the information and the data that we accumulate are in some sense trivial. And at the heart of everyone's existence really lies this core of something very, very awake, but yet it lies as something that's a potential. And not seeing that, we get tangled up in so much confusion. And on the basis of this confusion, we enter into a lot of afflicted states of mind that create a lot of realms of suffering. And it's to remedy this that we study the Buddha's teaching. What is extraordinary really is that the Buddha cut through the confusion that is present within the, you could say, the universe as we know it, and saw a far greater reality. But this reality that the Buddha saw was not some refined other reality, some spiritual dimension. It was actually seeing reality for what it is. We can say the Buddha took off his specs, his shades, his sunnies, and seeing reality clearly, also saw that in not seeing reality clearly, sentient beings suffer. So we don't see the Buddha as someone who is the creator or somebody miraculous. We see somebody who is a doctor, somebody who was a teacher, somebody who's there to show us something. And from the Buddha's time down until the Vijayadhara, the Venerable Chögyam Rinpoche, and other great masters, we have a living tradition of persons that actually have seen what the Buddha saw. But this seeing lies outside of the scope of what we ordinarily are taught in our culture. So it's not easy for us, you could say, ordinary persons, to actually grasp the vision and the significance of the Buddha's teaching and to actually implement it. And so, as much as we might be practitioners who have been practicing for a long time or studying the Buddhist teaching for a long time, there's always so much to be gained from studying these texts. I personally have studied Journey Without Goal quite a few times and have continually returned to this work over the years. And every time it's like reading it for the first time. So anyway, we're very, very fortunate that we have this work. And presently, we're then in the chapter called Being and Manifesting, which, particularly if we're engaged with the Vajrayana discipline, this is actually quite an important chapter. And there was somebody who has asked me to go a little bit over the topic basically of this chapter, which is what we commonly refer to as the three kayas, the Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Niyamanakaya. But the way that we actually connect with this, which sounds again very spiritual, and you might say, oh, that's something that the Buddhists they believe in Dhammakaya and Sambhogakaya and Niyamanakaya. It's a bit like saying in physics that physicists they believe in H2O, that they believe that the hydrogen and oxygen molecules together create water. Isn't that sweet? Well, on the basis of the empirical process of physics, we establish this as a fact, not as a belief. And on the basis of observing reality and discerning what is actually the nature of our reality, we talk about these three kayas. So it's not a belief, and it's something that each and every one of us need to relate to. And that's why Chögyam Trungpa very compassionately engages this discussion, not from the point of view of saying, oh, the Dhammakaya is the highest. And then you have out of compassion manifest the Rupakaya and with its Sambhogakaya and Niyamanakaya and so on, which of course you'd very often hear, and it's true. But what is unique about Chögyam Trungpa is actually it takes our hand and introduces us to our Niyamanakaya, to our Sambhogakaya, and to our Dhammakaya. And that's why he speaks about relating to the bodily situation, Nirmanakaya, relating to the emotional, intangible, yet strong, you could say vivid dimension of how we experience, even though it's not tangible. It's not something I can't see what your emotions are, you can't see mine. It is something that is very present within us. And that's this our Sambhogakaya. You could say it's Sambhogakaya with sunnies on, with shades on. And then, yes, Dharmakaya, what's that? Well, our Dharmakaya is mindlessness. It's the unconsciousness. It's not being properly awake. But what the proposition is that we relate to the body fully and seeing it for what it is. That's where we discover Nirmanakaya. If we see our emotions for what they are, that's where we see the Sambhogakaya. If we see our consciousness and we see through the mindlessness, this is where we discover our Dharmakaya. So Chögyam Trungpa in this chapter takes our hand and walks us through this. So as you, in the context of the Vajrayana, are going to come across these terms, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya continually, this is a rather important chapter. And also, we're not talking about three different things. We're just talking about how to relate to our phenomena, our world cannot be grasped. It's appearing, yet there's nothing about it that can be grasped. Haven't you noticed? Haven't you noticed you can't grasp this reality? There's nothing about this that is what we would call unique, or you could say unitary, unchanging, or permanent. Everything is conditioned. And that web of conditioning is what we call the dependent arising nature of phenomena. And as such, there's nothing inherently existing about it. So as such, then there is continually this nature of things, but yet it's appearing. So we would first say the lack of inherent existence, that's the truth of nature. That's where we fail to see it. That's awakening to that. That's the Dharmakaya. That's where our mindlessness is replaced by fully seeing things. And on the basis of that, then within that nature that cannot be grasped, everything appears. And the way that it appears on the subtle level, we could say Sambhogakaya, on the more manifest level, Nirmanakaya. Okay, so this is our reality. So it's just one reality. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm going to spend a little bit of time with the Dharmakaya, a little bit of time with the Sambhogakaya. Let's look at the Sambhogakaya, let's look at the Nirmanakaya. And of course it's confusing because a lot of iconography, you'll have the Dharmakaya, Vajradhara, the Dharmakaya Samantabhadra. And then you'll have the 5 families of the Sambhogakaya. Then you'll have the 6 Buddhas of the Nirmanakaya. So yes, it is admittedly confusing, but these are very accurate ways of actually portraying the nature that things manifest. And that's why we need to spend some time with this. And it's not just going to come like that. And also it has so much to do with experience. We need to actually make this a personal project. That's where it's not as if we need some deep realization, but we actually need to understand this is where we really need to put our attention in terms of our, you could say, personal experience. We need to give the Buddha the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, he's probably right, the Buddha guy, my teacher is probably right. All right. So here we have His Holiness Dujam Rinpoche, Jigdal Yeshe Dorje. And actually Chögyam Trungpa was quite close with Dujam Rinpoche, Jigdal Yeshe Dorje. And Dujam Rinpoche was very, very, very significant for a lot of lamas who are still with us. Grandfather and teacher of Tsongsa Gyalme Khyentse Rinpoche, teachers of Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche, Tukapema Wangyal, and Ziga Kongtrul Rinpoche, and so on. So, Trungpa Rinpoche here says, in studying Tantra, we relate with all 3 kayas simultaneously by relating to the Vajra Master who embodies all 3. The 3 kayas are not abstract principles, but we can relate to them experientially, personally, spiritually, and transcendentally, all at the same time. As we develop to the level of the teacher's body, the level of Nirmanakaya, we begin to experience the Sambhogakaya. At that level, emotions are transmuted and are workable. Beyond that, we also begin to tune into the Dhammakaya, which is open, all-pervading space. And this again, the same principles apply. The Nirmanakaya, the world, we have the world, but like Chögyam Trungpa was speaking about, we need to actually relate simply, fully, without manipulation, without strategies, but wholeheartedly, directly relating to the world. And this might actually sound possibly abstract, or how do we do this? Well, that's where we have the teacher. We actually look, how does the teacher relate to the world? That's where we might think that if our teacher, might appear on Zoom and he's just lying back in a chair and like this, you might think, oh, that he must be very tired. Or the people who are directing the Zoom call, can't they adjust the camera or something like that? But this is actually, as far as us as Vajrayana students go, the teacher is never some, you could say, there's nothing frivolous ever about the teacher, and our relationship should not be frivolous. And we should actually have the discipline of saying, there's something I can learn from this. And that is where we would discover the Vajra master is very skillful in relating with the world. The Vajra master might seem irreverent. The Vajra master might seem careless. The Vajra master might seem incredibly concerned about things that we're not concerned about. All the time, we shouldn't think, oh, he's really obsessive or he's really careless. It's nothing about the Vajra master. The Vajra master, he or she, is showing us something. And that's where the Vajra master is manifest in this world. And the Nirmanakaya, every aspect of the Nirmanakaya, the physical embodiment of the teacher, that is what we should look at in terms of relating to the world. And it's also when we begin to suss out and be sensitive to the teacher's, you could say, external physical interaction with the world, that we begin to understand what's behind it. We begin to understand the wisdom. We might see the teacher as elegant, but then again, we realize that there's an incredible degree of bliss, an incredible degree of compassionate interaction with the world that's basic to this. And that's where we can begin to be sensitive to a dimension that's beyond the physical presence of the teacher. And that is the Sambhogakaya of the teacher. And that is, yes, we portray it in iconography with the Sambhogakaya Buddhas, the male, female, the wrathful, peaceful Sambhogakaya Buddhas, the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities. All of these, they represent, you could say, the inner dimension of the teacher. And that's where connecting with that, meditating on that, and so on, is connecting with the, you could say, intangible, subtle aspect of the teacher. That's the Sambhogakaya. And yet, that elegance that we see, which comes from bliss, and which comes from compassion, insight, and so forth, where does that come from? Where do you learn that? Where did the teacher learn all these wonderful things? Where did, you could go up to the teacher, how did you learn to be so, whatever, Well, there's nothing that was taught. There's no Lama or Guru or Nirmanakaya finishing school where you learn behavior. It all comes from one single place, which is awakening, which is the Dhammakaya, from having shed mindlessness and awakened. And that's how the three are together. Within that awakened space, there's bliss, there's compassion, there's strength, there's wisdom, and that translates into the physical. So we have within the Dhammakaya, we have the Sambhogakaya, we have the Nirmanakaya. Trungpa Rinpoche continues, if we're going to study Tantra, it's necessary to understand the Trikaya principle of being and manifesting. And there we could say being aspect, which of course pervades all the three kayas, are particularly then the awake aspect, having no longer being caught up in mindlessness, and then the manifest aspect, which are the qualities that arise from that, what we sometimes call the Rupakaya or the Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya. In tantric practice, the first step is to realize the level of body, the Nirmanakaya. Then we see the 5 Buddha families are related with the Sambhogakaya, or the level of emotions. Beyond that, it's necessary to transcend both the bodily and emotional level, which is the Dharmakaya, high above. When we discuss Mahā'ati in the closing chapter, you may understand more about Dharmakaya, but first it's necessary to understand the importance of relating with the body or earthly existence and relating with the Vajramaster, the great teacher who exists on earth. In some sense, such a teacher is a magician, a conjurer. He or she has achieved total space, conquered the level of emotions, and he or she actually exists in an earthly body. So the teacher as such is someone who has understood everything there is to know. From the time of the Buddha down until today, we have then teachers who have the full awakened experience of reality and are not fooled by appearances. There's no notion of the appearing aspect of having some sort of ultimate existence. We of course have a very valid science around understanding the physical. That's great. But without understanding the nature of this, we'll never understand that which actually really rules us, which is the dimension of consciousness. And not only ordinary consciousness, but the unconfused consciousness, the foundation of what we call samsara and nirvana. So without properly understanding reality, just sort of, you could say, scratching the surface in terms of appearances and so forth, that's all very good. And we can end up with extraordinary technologies and so on, but we still don't really understand reality. So this is where the teacher is the one that then is able to properly teach us reality, properly enable us to relate to the bodily aspect of the manifest world, the emotional aspect of, you could say, our inner private experience, and the dimension of consciousness in its absolute ground, its naked condition, which we sadly in our mindlessness overlook. So the question of magic, the Sanskrit word for magic is siddhi, which means actualizing or working with the energy that exists in the realm of experience and the realm of physical being. So siddhi we very often translate as accomplishment. We very often have some sort of, you could say, some Buddhoid vocab that translates something like siddhi as something which we can't relate to. You know, it's like, oh, it's extraordinary. You know, the siddhi of the Mahasiddhas. You know, the accomplishment, walking on water or flying through space or whatever it might be, incredible clairvoyance and so on. So we might think that this sort of dimension of magic is something external, but it actually just means knowing reality in a greater way. Trungpa continues, unfortunately, in the Western world, the concept of magic seems to be associated with mysteriousness and impossible powers, such as turning fire into water or the floor into the sky. So magic is considered to be possible only for those few chosen people who develop mysterious magical powers. In comic books, for instance, magical things happen because a person possesses a certain power that he exercises over other people, either destroying them or helping them. Such a magician can change a giant into a dwarf, a mute into a bard, a cripple into a runner, and so forth. And we also have this whole sort of dream world, Tibet, you know, with Tintin in Tibet, with, you know, levitating monks, and you have, oh, what was it? There was some Marvel comic that they put into, was it Doctor Strange? I think it's Doctor Strange. They put into a movie with, what's his name, Cumberbatch, and all these, and both of these, Tintin in Tibet, and of course this Doctor Strange movie, I think that's what it's called. It's like the magic is taught by Tibetans, you know. It's actually the Marvel comic movie is shot in Kathmandu, I think, or portions of it, and so forth. You know, you have actually in Tibetology, you actually have a whole you could say discipline around dream world Tibet, how people construct Tibet. You know, the fantasies around Tibet. You know, you have Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd going to Tibet. You have, you know, Shangri-La and all of that. So there's this sort of this whole thing of just, you know, just anyway. so that way, this is where we then have this sort of rather unrealistic and sort of rather irrelevant, ultimately, understanding of what magic is. Siddhi, however, is about relating fully and properly. And that's where what we're talking about presently is not about something that's otherworldly or strange and all of that. It's about us begin to relate to this world, relate to this universe. In the West, we often treat spirituality with that comic book approach, and we view spiritual discipline as the process through which we will eventually end up as magicians. We feel that although we may have a few little problems as beginners, when we become highly accomplished persons, we don't have these problems. We'll be able to shake them off and do anything we want. That is a simple-minded concept of spiritual practice and the simple-minded concept of magic, that once we are accomplished persons, we will be able to do anything. We will be able to shake the universe, to change the shape of fleas and the habits of mice, to turn tigers into cats and cats into tigers. The thing is, our basic disposition wouldn't have changed. If we could all of that, we would we would still be the same neurotic person, just possibly more dangerous. So Trungpa Rinpoche continues, genuine mystical experience, according to either the Judeo-Christian tradition or the Buddhist tradition, has nothing to do with that kind of mysteriousness. It is not that the mysteriousness finally manifests, and then we realize that spirituality has some value after all. Now we don't need to ride elevators. We can just levitate. That is the ultimate idea of automation, the true American dream. From that point of view, the world is a nuisance. It is problematic. It gets in our way. So we hope we can change its course once we graduate to a higher level. And of course, you could say this was taught in America, and there you have we can talk about the American dream. But this, of course, is the dream now universally, and probably has always been, that we can just manipulate the world according to our will. Obviously, Trungpa Rinpoche says, there is a problem with that approach to spirituality. Again, this is where our approach with the Buddhist teaching and engaging with the Buddhist teaching means that we're going to have to let go of some of the naivete. I don't think anybody here in the present audience is particularly saddled with that kind of naivete. I think everybody's gone through a fair bit of skepticism and inquiry and analysis that forms the basis for the spiritual journey. But at the same time, this is so rampant in the misunderstandings that we have in our culture and our society, that in Buddhism you have beliefs, that in Buddhism you do strange things that are not relating to the world, and so on and so forth. You're actually escaping into something else. That is very often common among our friends, and very often a common belief wherever we go. There's not much we can do about it. Our friends will kind of look at us and say, well, you're doing your weird stuff there. And we can say, yeah, I'm doing my weird stuff. And, and then they're sort of live and let live, I guess. But it is, in a way, it's very sad that there's this incredible misunderstanding in terms of what we're actually doing on the spiritual path. So we're not like that, right? Okay. A deeper problem is that this approach is based on misunderstanding the world of ego. We think that ego can achieve enormous power beyond its present ability, which is called magic. In that case, we do not have to give up anything at all. We can just latch on to some greater power and expend further energy in the direction of ego. That is an enormous problem, an enormous blockage. And that is precisely why it is necessary for potential students of Tantra to go through a gradual process and give up any idea of the rapid path. It is necessary to start slowly, very slowly, to start at the bottom and grow up slowly. In that way, our simple-minded version of the cosmos, of the universe, changes and becomes more real, more personal, and more direct. Our world becomes workable. It no longer remains separate from our basic being at all. The world contains invitations for us to participate, and we, in turn, extend our invitation and willingness to participate to the world. In that way, the world can come into us, and we can get into the world. Again, we are not seeking this magical solution to our problems. I engage with Buddhism, and all the sadness that I experience in terms of my family, myself, my world, my worries, and so forth, is going to be cured through the practice of the Buddhist teaching. I'm going to have some miraculous way of just getting rid of all of that. That's not at all what we're talking about. And that is where we're going to have to participate with the world on the conditions of the world. Of course, yes, with the practice, we become more skillful, we become more aware of the conditions of the world. We see the world clearer. But again, that's not going to happen unless we actually do the hard yards of sitting on the cushion, of actually studying the teaching and discontinuing our ordinary fascination with our thoughts and our inner narratives and our storylines. So unless we begin to sort of part ways with the habitual ways that we construct our world, nothing really is going to change. We can fill our houses with Buddhist stuff, and we can, travel to Buddhist congresses and teachings and so on. That's not really going to help unless we're actually beginning to open up and beginning to relinquish our ordinary sort of limitations, that we're taking off our sunnies, our shades. So beyond that, there is a magical aspect of the world. So at this point, then, we can acknowledge that there's a greater reality. Trungpa Rinpoche says that magic does not have to be sought, but it happens by itself. It's not as sensational as we might expect. The greatest magic of all is to be able to control and work with the ego, our mind. So we could say that magic begins at home, with our own minds. If we couldn't practice magic at home, we would be at a loss. We would have no place to begin. So magic begins at home. We might ask, what is so magical about all this? We have been working with ego all along throughout our Buddhist training. What's so special about this magic? We don't see anything particularly extraordinary about it. That is true. It is quite ordinary. In fact, the ordinary aspect becomes so powerful that it is magic. If something is extraordinary, it's usually a mechanical invention, something sensational but feeble. But because of ordinariness, magic is possible. So again, going back to this Marvel comic, where Dr. Strange, he's someone who, as he trains with these Tibetans, he begins to draw little fire circles in space. And then when the fire circle is complete, he can go into this dimension, and then he pops up in, I don't know, New York City or something, So that kind of incredibly naive, unimaginative dimension of of magic is rather sad. What we should see is perhaps Dr. Strange sort of discovering how things begin to work out wonderfully when he takes out the garbage for his, in his domestic situation, or how things begin to work out when he actually really pays attention to the world around. That's the magic we're talking about here. Trungpa Rinpoche continues, as far as Tantra is concerned, magic is relating with the world on as ordinary a level as possible. We make flowers grow. We make the sun rise and the moon set. If we stay up long enough, we'll see the moon set and the sun rise. If we would like to watch the sunrise, we have to stay up so late that it finally becomes early. There is some discipline involved with that. We can't give up and go to bed to take a rest. If we do, quite possibly, we will miss the sunrise. The question of magic at this point is completely relevant to our life, to our path, to our actual practice. Magic is very real, direct, and personal. It's so personal that it becomes excruciating. It is at the level of excruciation that we have a glimpse of magic. We find ourselves on a threshold, and at that point we can, in fact, push ourselves one step further. That threshold occurs when we think we have gone too far in extending ourselves to the world. There is some kind of warning, and at that time a faint invitation takes place. Quite possibly we chicken out at that point because it requires so much effort and energy to go further. We feel we have put in enough effort and energy already, and we don't want to go beyond that. So-called sensible people wouldn't take such a risk. Oh no, we have gone far enough, we mustn't go too far, let's step back. So again, the path doesn't really allow us to say, okay, I've already gone out of my comfort zone for long enough. Now I have deserved time in my comfort zone. I want to go back. Of course, the whole thing is our suffering stems from this addiction to our little petty place, our little comfort zone. And so the message here is, from the point of view of magic and from the point of view of the path of awakening, that we could actually discover that we begin to really fully live when we can live outside of the habitual little places that we like to retreat into. So that's where our friends and our impulses might say, okay, you've done enough, now it's a time to just indulge yourself, make yourself comfortable, go back into the comfort zone. And that's, of course, what we're talking about here, is that we might think we've gone far enough, but we actually still have a way to go. According to Trungpa, it says, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, when a brilliant light comes to us in the Pardo or after state, we shy away from it. When a pleasant, faint, soothing light comes to us, we go towards it. In choosing that dimmer light, we come back to square one, which is samsara. The point at which we can either extend ourselves further and go toward an unfamiliar brilliance, or return to a more soothing and familiar dimness, is the threshold of magic. It is very personal. We feel pushed, hassled, and exposed through our practice. All kinds of irritations and all kinds of boundaries begin to come up. And we would like to stay within our territory, within those boundaries. We don't really want to step beyond them. We fear that in stepping beyond those boundaries, we might do something beyond the boundaries of the teachings, something beyond the level of basic human sanity. Basically, we fear that we might destroy ourselves if we go beyond the territory of survival. Trungpa says such boundaries or thresholds always come up, and we do not want to push anymore. But some kind of push is necessary. We might say, well, we have given our income and our possessions to the church. We have committed ourselves. We have signed our names on the dotted line. We pay our dues. We subscribe to your magazine. We do everything. But there is still something left behind. We're still missing the point. Those commitments are very easy to make. At this point, it is a question of giving up our arms and our legs. Even that might be easy to do. We can give up our hair, we can give up our beard, we can take off our clothes, but we have no idea, none whatsoever, how to give up our heart and brain. Once we give up our heart and brain, the magic begins. It actually does. That is the spark. We give up our little heart, our little brain, and then we get greater nothingness. That is where the magic begins. We do not get anything back in return as such, because we actually have given up, but still something happens. Actual magic begins there. The magic cannot begin unless we're willing to step over the threshold. We have to step on the electric fence that has been keeping us inside the corral, and then we have to step over it. We might get a mild shock or a violent shock in the process, but that is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, there is no Tantra, there is no magic. According to the Tantric tradition, there are 4 levels of magic. The first is one-pointedness, sechik. In this case, we're not talking about one-pointedness as it is often described in Hinayana meditation practice. We're not talking about a highly sharpened, pointed needle that pierces through discursive mind, enabling us to develop our mindfulness. The Vajrayana version of mindfulness, or one-pointedness, is like a dull needle, a dagger made out of stone rather than efficient stainless steel. When we sew fabric with a sharp needle, the needle sews through the texture of the fabric without damaging it. The needle just goes in and out, and consequently, our clothes are made very efficiently with almost invisible seams. In Vajrayana one-pointedness, we're not going through the web of the fabric, but we're crushing what is there. When we crush the fabric, there is no obstacle. It is through penetration, very, very personal and very real. So one-pointedness, or the first level of magic, is a particular kind of penetration. Wherever there are obstacles, they are acknowledged, and then they are cut through very bluntly. Therefore, there is a hole, a gate, or an entrance point. A sharp needle is sneaky and efficient and keeps apologizing to each strand of fabric, making each one feel better. With such a needle, one piece of fabric can be joined to another quite beautifully without destroying or damaging the fabric. It is a very polite approach. Tantric one-pointedness, on the other hand, is blunt and not at all polite. Emotions occur in our experience. They're not suppressed in a neurotic fashion, but instead they're dealt with directly in their own place. So we could say at this point that we're not apologizing for what we are. We're quite simply existing without any need to fit in or negotiate the space that we're in. The tantric practitioner is comfortable. The tantric practitioner knows, doesn't need to apologize about it. So this is then the first level, simplicity. The second one, in Tibetan, Tsetik. And then the second one is simplicity, or Trötra. Sometimes also in philosophy we would translate this term as freedom from conceptual constructions. And that is then the absence of the ordinary projections that we, you could say, naively or in our confusion subscribe to. So this is where then this level then is referred to as simplicity. But in terms of practice then, rather than think of this as an absence of the conceptual constructs we speak about in philosophy, here it's much more direct. This is in the language of Mahamudra. We're just referring to that not getting deceived by the ordinary conceptual mind. So it's simplicity. Trungpa says the second level of magic is called simplicity or non-complication. Literally, it is non-exaggeration. Usually we find ourselves exaggerating. This exaggeration takes the form of spiritual materialism, trying to acquire all kinds of spiritual techniques and disciplines, and it also takes the form of psychological materialism, or trying to acquire all kinds of little metaphysical theories and experiences. The point here is that, having already been penetrated by the Vajrayana one-pointedness, the phenomenal world has been related with properly, fully, and thoroughly. It can exist in its own way. Therefore, simplicity is there already. In this case, simplicity does not mean being a harmless person who lives in a hermitage and is so kind and good that he would not kill a flea. Simplicity is non-complication rather than romantic simplicity. This means, again, that there's no need for further exaggeration. So this is the place where we don't build up what we would call our extremes or our reference points, our psychological constructions of reality. That, from this point of view, is just elaborating on that which needn't have any elaboration. No need for the exaggeration. Often, when we refer to somebody as simple, we mean that the person is slightly dumb or naive. He's so simple that he does not know how to be sophisticated or complicated. We might find that type of energy very refreshing, but such simplicity is regressing rather than progressing in any way. In this case, simplicity is self-existence. Something is simple because of its own magical qualities. For instance, fire burns by its own simplicity, but still has its energy. A rock has its magic because it still sits and never gets bored. A river keeps flowing in a simple way. It never gets bored and never gives up its course. So the qualities of self-existence are directness and simplicity, rather than purely being naive or good or kind. The next level of magic is known as one taste. Because things have a self-existing simplicity, they do not need any reference point. That is one taste. No need for further reference point. It is direct, one flavor. Usually sugar is sweet because salt is salty, but such reference points do not apply. One taste is a one-shot deal. If you feel extreme pain and frustration, you feel it. Often I find students saying that they feel extremely pained and frustrated, but they cannot understand why. There is some element of truth in that. There may be magic in that, in fact. The students are not being analytical but direct. They feel the nowness of the pain or the pleasure as it is, personally, directly, simply. That magic is very powerful, very important. Again, this is something where we go beyond concepts. We're actually feeling fully and not necessarily relating to philosophy or anything. There's a full experience, and that's sort of the dimension then of this feeling is then where we're entering into this, you could say, the key to one taste. The fourth level of magic is known as non-meditation. In this case, meditation is the idea of contemplating some object, such as visualizing a candle, a rose, or a clear pond. We find ourselves associating with what we have visualized. We become a living rose. When we have finished meditating on the rose, we begin to feel like a rose, rosy. But in non-meditation, we do not meditate on anything. It is beyond reference points of subject and object. It is just simple, direct, personal experience. Non-meditation provides a contrast to our expectations and constant sense of wanting. We always want something. We want to bring something in constantly, all the time. We want it badly, seemingly, but that is questionable. What is this wanting? I would like a blah, blah, blah. Could I do blah, 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 blah? We manifest our wanting in all kinds of ways, but it is all the same thing. I want to eat. I don't even want to chew. Once I get the food inside my mouth, I just want to swallow. The magical level of non-meditation is entirely different from that constant wanting. Non-meditation is not necessarily not wanting as such, or being dispassionate and cool and good. Rather, we're not particularly hungry. We're not particularly full either. Nonetheless, we're not particularly hungry. We can accommodate food if something to eat comes up. It is welcome, even fantastic. But let us eat properly in a non-meditative way. That is the greatest magic of all. At the final or fourth level of the magical process, we do not just perform magic because our magic wand works. When an angry soldier fires his machine gun at his enemies, each time the machine gun operates properly and kills his enemies, he licks his lips with enormous satisfaction. Somehow, magic doesn't happen that way. Magic is an expression of total non-aggression and an expression of total energy and power at the same time. Okay, I think we'll stop at this point. I think we've completed these 4. Yeah, then we'll come to the concluding discussion next time. So just if there's any questions. Could you say if this simplicity still grounded in the foundation of the other yanas? Oh, very much. It's just that it's a greater simplicity. What we're talking about here are actually the 4 stages of Mahamudra. So they're quite well known if you've studied literature like the moonbeams of Mahamudra, the lamp of Mahamudra, and so on. But it is, as always, and the Vajrayana in general, it's all grounded on the foundations of you could say, the other yanas, such as what we call the Hinayana and Mahayana. So, of course, simplicity here attains a greater understanding. And particularly this term, simplicity, chudra, like I said, it's sometimes translated as freedom from elaborations or freedom from conceptual constructs. And it is part of, you could say, vipassana. Particularly in the Mahayana, this is really, you could say, the paramita vehicle, and the paramita of prajna is the discovery of the simplicity. And that then becomes the foundation for the vision and the practice of the Vajrayana. Yeah. So is one taste the universal feeling aspect of the myriad of various feelings? I guess you could say so. It's that, when we would sometimes say that one taste is that which is present regardless, and tasting regardless of whether it's something that we find agreeable or disagreeable. So yes, it's where we're feeling. Yeah. But it's the very naked feeling without the, you could say, the complications or the sort of additives of our individual subjective likes and dislikes. And someone's saying, if the Bardo is happening even during our waking life and not just after death, does that mean we have the opportunity to practice moving toward light before we die? Very good question, and yes. Now, of course, we talk about different Bardos. So we talk about the Bardo, we talk about the natural Bardo of this life. So that's one Bardo. Then you talk about the Bardo that happens just at the moment of death, which is the Bardo of the absolute nature, the Bardo Dharmata. And then we have two Bardos that happen before we take rebirth. One is the, you could say, the naked exposure of all what the ground of our being, all our psychological stuff, all our wisdom stuff, where again, this is where we have the instructions in the Tibetan Book of the Dead that look at the, don't fall for the habitual dim light, but actually face the greater light that is the ground nature, the reality of who we are. And so in this way, and then there's the Bardo of becoming, which is then when we seek then rebirth. If we fail to sort of be free, then we begin to look for a place that we could land, where we could be safe. But all along, these four Bardos, they continually propose that liberation could happen. So the Bardo of this life comes with the same injunction to, you could say, go for the clear light. And that is what we do when we choose not to follow habitual patterns. For example, we might have a thought coming up, memories of something, and we could go for the dim light of sort of sitting there and pondering, oh, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me, I'm shaped by what happened in the past, and so on. That's the habitual dim light. But we could also stay present. We could actually not necessarily tag along with the, you could say, the habitual patterns, the habitual narratives. We could actually stay present. We could see it for what it is, thoughts that are taking place in the present moment, nothing to do with the past. It's memories that are taking place right now. And we could have that, you could say, vivid clarity that comes from just staying on the spot presently. And that's where we can talk about, we can move towards the clear light in this life before we die. And that's, of course, what we're doing throughout the path. Also, we're doing this in the practice of non-aggression or whatever other practices that we engage with. So, when Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche talks about magic, is it the same as seeing the world through the eyes of prajna? It comes from seeing the world through the eyes of prajna. Yes, that is again seeing the world without our habitual overlay and not being driven by our habitual patterns that might have sort of a lazy idea of what magic is. Then fully engaging with the world as it is what prajna allows us. What, of course, Trungpa Rinpoche is adding to this is then understanding that the phenomenal world, in that it's not other, it's not separate from you could say our prajna. It holds qualities that are magic from the point of view of you could say our ordinary habitual patterns. But of course, from the point of view of prajna itself, this is just, you could say, the display, the natural display. So there's while it has the notion of siddhi, of accomplishment, of being at ease within the world, it's actually not necessarily something that is seen as being other than the nature of reality. So that's where we need to be clear on how we understand the term magic, and it's not something that is like far out or otherworldly or mysterious. Thank you. Needed some realistic example of what clear light means. Yes, so it is what we are continually cultivating through our practice. And right now we have the opportunity. See, the moment that we die, which we will, then we won't at that time have the all the conditions there. The whole Bardo teaching is actually premised on telling us this is how we exist, and we could do something about it now. Do it now, because later you might not be. We might be severely have difficulties at the time when we're dying. We might be fearful. We might be depressed. there's so many things that we'll take care. We'll be terrified. So now that we have some grounding, we have some opportunity. This is the time to do it. Later, it's nice, there's this whole thing of, yes, we'll let Rinpoche know. Yes, don't worry, we'll let the lamas know that you passed away. They will say some prayers. And indeed, there are some extraordinary things that um, we that possibly could happen. But at the same time, this actually depends for us, having already established those connections. For the Lama to help us, then also there has to be an incredible degree of devotion and openness to the teacher. As Chögyam Trungpa, he says in the introduction to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Guru can't save us, but he can instigate the possibility. Meaning the Guru is not going to come down and sort of pull us out, but the Guru can instigate the possibility that can happen if we at the present time cultivate the conditions for that. And that is then complete trust, deep trust that doesn't just come from us sort of, oh, now I feel trust, it comes from hard work with our mind, hard work with relinquishing our habitual addiction to our thoughts and narratives, working with the mind, opening up for greater experience, and then beginning to have some understanding of what really devotion is and what it is, and then beginning to experience blessings. And that's where then there is some connection that could take place. So this we're talking about now, now is the time. So of course, once we're dying, then people are not going to come and say, well, it's too late, That's not going to happen. There's always something to be done. So yes, even if we were pretty pathetic with our application in this life, there will still be people around who say, oh yes, we'll get on the phone, we'll call the Lama, we'll be doing prayers for you, we'll be doing the Koro Dongdru, we'll be doing all these wonderful things for you. Sure, we'll do Poa for you. Sure, there's still possibilities. And of course, if we have the foundations in place, then these will be effective. Is it correct to say that the simplicity state is a synonym of remaining in the open space of Dharmakaya or Rigpa? I guess so. And then there's another question. But if we are trained in looking for the Guru, does that help to trust that he will find us in the Bardo? Well, it's a little bit about looking, assessing the Guru, and then recognizing the Guru's value, and then on the basis of our devotion, then there could be some connection taking place, and that is where the Guru can find us in the Bardo. Yeah, can help us, can pull us through. Do you agree that Westerners not born in Buddhist countries can never quite embed all the things that constitute living, practicing, and absorbing Buddhism from an early age? No. But all of things that we're talking about, it's a new science. It's like if you go to Irian, you go to Borneo, you go to places where the culture is Stone Age, and you begin to teach technology. It'll take time. Eventually, it will become second nature. You will have, the locals will catch on, but it might take generations. Similarly, also with Buddhism, it's basically the science is not there. So the practices are being absorbed, but then again, they're not very often fully understood. So there are definitely challenges in terms of the so-called Westerners, which are not Westerners anymore, by the way. They're also so-called Easterners, in that we have this rollout of this uniform modern culture, which believes itself to be so superior, and which really prevent a proper appreciation. Doesn't have the capacity to understand the insights of some of the existing cultures of so-called pre-modernity. And so within this context, yes, it's not easy. It's not easy. And even nowadays, Buddhists trying to find a way to create Buddhist education. Very difficult. There's Buddhist education is not just telling the kids to sit down and practice mindfulness or teaching them compassion or things like that. Yeah, that's part of it. And it will, of course, contribute in terms of teaching ethical behavior, understanding the nature of empathizing with others, understanding causes of happiness, and so forth. But still, it's just tip of the iceberg, really. But it can be done, and it has been done. And of course, we very often see in communities around great teachers that I remember visiting Tsongtse Gyalrang Rinpoche's father, Chunli Nobo Rinpoche, who was just incredibly skillful with dealing with children. And as much as you could say Chunli Nobo Rinpoche lived on his own planet in terms of his very, very traditional Tibetan way of doing Buddhism, he was also incredibly aware of the Western culture and the Western science. And he was very, very sharp and direct in his, you could say, critique. But he also upheld really, and and so with his, you could say, way of engaging with his students, it was very much from an early age engaging with Tibetan ways of doing things. But the thing is, with Trungpa Nobo Rinpoche, there was such a dimension of wisdom and goodness that was deeply touching. So that's where something transmits beyond just, you could say, the level of the mechanics of knowing this or knowing that. There's something that's far greater. And you can see Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche with his Shambhala, the Enlightened Society of Shambhala provided something that was, you can say, universally applicable, very much within a modern context. So of course this is happening. It is happening. Very much requires a very compassionate teacher that's willing to go in and immerse him or herself within the culture. Big discussion. Children are pretty fast learners, that's right. So but the problem is the adults. The problem is the adults. The adults are not educated yet. So we don't have adults that, who really can convey Buddhism yet, apart from, pure exercises in various kinds. Trungpa Nobo Rinpoche. What is the name of the teacher you mentioned who's so good with children? Well, he passed away some years ago, but Trungpa Nobo Rinpoche was just amazingly good with. He created a whole sort of space, really, a space of magic, a space of goodness. It was incredible with the children. Children really thrived there. Also, very clear parameters. It wasn't a very sort of culture of permissiveness, particularly. Very clear parameters, but also so much sanity and humor, lightness, brilliance. But that's a siddha, Trungpa Nobo Rinpoche was a siddha. He was one of these magical people. And this, by the way, is the son of Dudjom Rinpoche. So the image you have on your left is His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche. So I'm talking about his son. Okay. So next time we'll conclude our discussion around magic.